Today, we are getting quite theoretical and we are going to be looking at different models and ideas on how to best support people and applying an autistic lens to it. The reason why we're doing that is there really aren't that many solid theories that have been tailor-made for autistic individuals. Today, we are focusing on autism. That is going to be our key focus today. If those of you who do not know, my name is Nat and I work at a social enterprise called Exception Individuals. We support people to better understand their own noggins and support people who work directly with us to implement reasonable adjustments. Bit of a mouthful, but you get the gist. We're good guys, I hope. That's at least the plan. Here's me. Not only have I had lots of therapy, also autistic, and have a master's in neuroscience. Good hands. Psychosocial care of autism. Psycho as in psychology and social as in working within the community. It is a big subject, and today we are going to do more of a focus on different types of therapies, both family and individual, and some kind of classic ideas of our understanding of how the brain works. When I've thought after mental health support via the NHS, because I live in the UK, I'll be honest with you, there's room for improvement. Let's just say that. I didn't find things overly helpful to me because they weren't adapted to my neurodivergence. But you tell me as well if you have had similar experiences or different. It's also good to define autism. Autism is a big area, but ultimately we are just talking about different ways of communicating and maybe repetitive behavior and sensory sensitivities. Those are the key characteristics that we're going to be looking at and why they might cause friction within family units and within society and in work environments in general. Rupert says, I am working with an ADHD therapist because I was diagnosed with that first. I was diagnosed with ASD after this, so I'm considering my options at the moment. Do you know what, Rupert? It's interesting because people might be experts in one area, but not in another area. And you're thinking, are they taking all of me into consideration? Even if you found someone who was a specialist in ADHD and autism, there's more to you than just that. April says, I once had family therapy during a difficult time with my family. My mum didn't find the therapy particularly helpful. Do you know what, April? I think it's great that you were willing to give it a go and try it. I've had mixed results depending. I've always found it very useful, but implementing it was a different challenge. Oh, Sean says, I've had lots of therapy, some helpful, some not. But the main problem was that I didn't know I was autistic, and autism actually explains the majority of my issues. I was going to therapy for the first place. That is also really interesting because if someone isn't aware, then they're not able to tailor their approaches to suit you. Now, we've got to start off with Freud because he's always the go-to guy, really outdated. However, had some interesting ideas which have significantly influenced our understanding of psychosocial therapy today. Some of you may have heard of this before, some of you may not, but he thinks the brain is split up into id, ego, and superego. In a nutshell, the first one is your real basic desires. I want, I need, satisfy me. Food, sleep, all of those type of things. Then you've got the ego, we're in the adult, and then the superego, the more nurturing, the punishing. It's essentially the brain playing with itself. We've got basic needs, interaction with the external world, and knowing right and wrong, and choosing what route to follow. We know that we process the world differently. And did Freud take that into consideration? My first question to open up to all of you is what subconscious feelings or actions do we have, particularly with autism? If you are autistic, super relevant to you. I just want to know, do you know what thoughts subconsciously go through your head? Now, I could see why this could be a little bit of a subconscious, how would I know? But sometimes when you wake up, when you have fleeting moments, you'll have an idea. So remember, you've got things that you want right now, things where your brain is able to dictate and turn, and also things which you know are morally right or wrong. As a society, we like to think that we are all on the same page on what is right and wrong, but clearly that's not right, because you've got your cultural background, your gender, your race, religion, all of these things, and our neurology, which isn't often taken into consideration. We've got more reflection, want to be a happy person, reflection, multiple outcomes. This is a very open question, panic. The brain does what it does without us even realizing. But why is it doing that? There's some things like breathing and sleeping that our brain will naturally do. But there are other things, such as trauma, which our brain will suppress or bring up when we're not really expecting it. Just to go on here, you've got your conscious, which is like what you're completely aware of. I'm aware I'm awake right now. I'm aware that I'm attending this webinar. Then you've got your subconscious, your memories, your stored knowledge. If you want your memories, in theory, you should be able to access them, but they're not continuously around. There's something that you have to dive into. Then when we go to deep down, we've got our fears, which kind of dictate our actions in day-to-day life, whether or not we're violent, if we act upon sexual desires, or if we choose not to, moral urges, shameful experiences. These things, I think, depend greatly upon our neurology, how our brain interprets things. Does it interpret things as wrong, moral, correct? Lots of research has been done into this. But when we apply it to autism, does it still hold up? April says, one subconscious action I have done was mentioning something from an old email in a new email, for example, in an old email where someone said I unintentionally offended them. I apologized to them for causing offense in a newer email. Yeah, many a times I've unintentionally offended someone, and that was due to the way that I kind of interpret body language. Sometimes I give too much or I do not give enough. And I would say that for those who are autistic, maybe our subconscious potentially is much stronger. If you were to put me to a side and say that, you know what you did was actually not okay, I'd be like, you know what, you're right, it's not okay. But in that moment, I could be completely oblivious. But it might mean that these kind of levels of the deepness of the water might be slightly ajarred to those of our neurotypical counterparts. Rupert says, reading the book, How Emotions Are Made, which a more constructive view of emotions. Very interesting, Rupert. I might give that one a check out. Do you actually like Freud's theory that our subconscious is essentially split into 3 levels? And there are some things we have control over, some things that we can dip in and out of, and other things that we have no access to, but still influence us. Bear in mind, just a theory, and a lot of fraud stuff just doesn't hold up today. However, it sets a good foundation of what we can build off of. The superego has really interesting connotations. We're going to look at how other people have expanded upon it and took it into arguably more interesting directions. Okay, most people think, yeah. Now, the next person I want to introduce you to is Klein. We've got object relation theory. This kind of builds upon a lot of Freud's work. Melanie did coexist at the same time as Freud, but they did differ at certain avenues. She's got how childhood experiences shape relationships in autistic individuals. They're saying, depending on how our childhood is, will massively dictate how our relationships are in life. This is saying it's less to do with genetics and more to do with environmental factors. Autistic children may view objects, people, or sensory experiences as overwhelmingly good or bad due to sensory sensitivities and social challenges. Where some people will say good, bad, autistic people tend to be more on the extreme, either overwhelmingly good or overwhelmingly bad. How Melanie compares to Freud is she places emphasis on interpersonal relationships, where Freud will be more on biological based desires. One is learnt, one is pre-built in. An emphasis that the intimacy and the nurturing of the mother is really important and is like the key thing. Freud is like, it's the power and the control of the father that has a bigger influence. Then we've got behavior is monitored by a human contract and relationship. Depending on your relationship with the individual will very much dictate your motivations and intentions towards them. Then we've got behavior is motivated by sexual energy. But without going into too deep on this, one is saying, you know what? You can't control your body. Your sexual urges control you. The other one is saying, depending on the relationship you have with different people, you can choose. You can see that they come about it from very different angles. One didn't always agree with the other. They were somewhat at odds, but I do see actually they can complement each other rather than going against each other. I'll be curious to know which kind of method you think sounds more plausible or aligns with your own understanding of how your brain works. Bear in mind that what they're saying is a lot of this is subconscious. Continuing with Melanie, in the first 6 months, babies form a sense of self. Before 6 months, we have no idea who we are. We are just clueless. But we also know that those with autism do typically develop later, as in it is a neurodevelopmental disorder after all. Would this 6 months time frame still count for those of us on the spectrum? Sees birth as caregivers in part. You either find birth, like your childhood, really loving or very scary. It's quite binary, but that can dictate what direction you go on so early on. From 6 months, we begin to see caregivers as a whole person mixed with qualities. What this is saying is when we meet people, we know, yes, they could be good, they could be bad. It's nuanced, it's a mixed bag. You can be an amazing person and do bad things. You can be a bad person and do good things. But when you are a really young infant, it's very black or white. This is why the early stages of childhood are absolutely essential to a child's development. This is just my take on it, but let's say you have autism and the way you interpret the world is different. A parent might try to show you love, but that love could come across as scary. So you could unintentionally change the course of that child's life from really early on. Just an idea. Again, any comments, do let me know, because this is an area which is open for interpretation. Moving on to Donald, he spoke about a good enough mother. Forget about fathers, not so important. He's very much continuing on from Melanie, where saying women, mothers are the most crucial part to the success of a child. When we talk about a non-neurodivergent child, there's lots of research to say about what is considered good enough. Remember, if it's not good enough, you are seen as scary and that could damage a child. If you are good enough, then you are seen as loving. But what do you think a parent of an autistic child is the bare minimum they need to do in order to set their child on a correct, good path, ideally before 6 months of life? We got caring, loving, nice, polite, patient, empathetic. Yep. Do you think there's any differences with autism though? Do we have to make additional adaptations, or is it the exact same approach? Take them as an individual. Yeah, but I think individualism is really crucial, particularly if you have other children that may not have autism and you treat them the same. And that's when there could be a mismatch. Any more? I appreciate these are very difficult questions. Approachable and available, role play, be patient. I think that's quite good because ultimately we need to learn body language. I often tell people where certain emotional responses will become natural to you. For me, I have had to learn them. Of course, we've all had to learn them, but for some of us, it comes really easy. There might be certain expressions which I don't innately pick up on. A bit more patience, maybe some role play, maybe some teaching. This is what happy looks like. This is what sad looks like. Could set a good foundation. Understanding specific needs. Yeah, Donald's got some good things there. Let's expand upon his views. He created the object relation theory, and this expands upon the idea of a good enough mother. If he says we've got provide nurturing environments, oh, that's good. Encouraging independence, which a lot of you spoke about. A mum's imperfection teach coping, so you don't have to be a perfect mother to be good enough. And an emphasis on supportive caregiver. These were like a criteria to be good enough. I would go as far to say that those with autistic children, you have to double up those things. We know autism is typically diagnosed from around 3 to 4. That is considered early, and enough that is called late onset autism. You are not going to know, likely, that your child has autism before 6 months. I think this is why it's so crucial to take these elements and really embrace them. Remember, we're not talking about people being super mums. I think that comes later. Right now, it is just creating a foundation for your child to develop their own understanding on the difficulties and challenges of the world around us. All right, moving nicely on. What do you reckon causes psychological difficulties in autistic children's life if this is not met? We talked about how all these things are needed, but what do you think is the crucial thing that will cause difficulties mentally if these building blocks of love aren't initially catered for? We will progress on from children later, by the way, but it's good to start the foundation. One model which is very popular is the biopsychosocial model, which is essentially saying in order to have a good well-being and overall health, you've got to have good biology, genetics, social interactions, and then psychological, how you internally process. All right, so we've got non-loving environments, needs of the babies are not met, failure to protect from distress. Yeah, it is a bit of all of these, to be honest. Sometimes these factors are going to be beyond our control. Things happen that we can't choose. Then the brain takes a long time to unlearn things. Learning when you're young, super easy. Unlearning, very difficult. Balby said this: in order to grow up mentally healthy, which of course we all want to do, the child should experience a warm, intimate, and continuous relationship with its mother. You'll notice that apart from Freud, everyone has been really hitting home on the mother. Maybe that's a bit outdated, but obviously there is a unique bond between the mother and the child because of, naturally, the pregnancy process. Attachment theory suggests autistic children need a warm bond with their mum. This might clash a little bit to a traditional view of autism, where we can become cold or unempathetic, or some people have found that they haven't been able to bond with their child, maybe due to lack of eye contact, appropriate emotional response. You could see here that there's going to be a bit of a challenge because there are going to be difficulties and we do have to adapt to those challenges in order for these basic needs to be met. It's looking like at the moment that maybe you are slightly more fragile to the dangers of early life when you have autism. Now, we know autism is lifelong. You can't get rid of autism, nor do we want to, a lot of us would say. But the early years are absolutely crucial to their development. It doesn't stop you from being autistic, but it allows you to integrate with society fluidly. Rupert says, I heard some research say that autistic boys need warm bond with mums, but autistic girls, it is with the dad. That's interesting. Ultimately, these are just theories. We don't really know, but they're interesting things to take into consideration. Early care can shape how an autistic child develops. This is something which I wish more people took into consideration. By saying supporting them early on doesn't mean that we are trying to dissolve the autism within them, but we are setting them up for success, giving them the building blocks in order to continue their own development later down the line. If they have a good idea of the world around them, which a lot of us struggle with, and a good self-awareness, which again, a lot of us don't understand ourselves too much later in life, and able to read other people's emotions, those three collectively create a good foundation to navigate life around us. If it just so happens, these three are things that a lot of us really struggle with. I'd love to know with you, do you meet all three criterias or do you struggle with one more than the other? I think I know myself, but till my teenage years when I really still got to understand my brain, the world around me, I'm still struggling to navigate. Others, I'm always misinterpreting those around me. I'm not really aligning up with this kind of internal working model of the self. All right, so we got what they expect in the future. Do you have an understanding of that? How they connect with others? Do you or the autistic person you have in mind connect well with others? And how others treat them? Do people treat you well or not? Some things are subconscious, other things are conscious, and other things are beyond our control. All right, hope you're all following. It's just throwing a lot of theories at you. There's lots to go around. We're going to look at some family therapies now. And now the child's moved up, grown up, and for whatever reason, some of these basic needs weren't met, either due to poor parenting, but may I just say that? Look, that's very unlikely. The vast majority of us do have good up. The other ones is that maybe a disconnect between the child's preferred way of being nurtured and cared for, which can disalign them from this good enough parenting. Now you've got a child who has some dysregulation with themselves and the others around them. When you've got parents who are both neurotypical and a neurodivergent child, there's going to be communication challenges. And even if you are neurodivergent and your child is neurodivergent, there's going to be communication challenges. We're looking at different therapies that might be able to heal potential trauma that exists. A while ago, back in the 50s and 60s, there was a group of really famous researchers that got together, and they were looking at systematic therapy. How can everyone collectively be part of the solution to better communication and overall quality of life? When applied to autism, because this research was more general at the time, a few kind of key things emerge. You got autism may reveal family issues. When you understand that someone has been diagnosed with autism, quite likely there'll be underlying family issues under the surface. The reason why is people may have lived many years being misunderstood and not feeling heard or able to communicate effectively. Then we've got the idea that behavior is communication. While some people with autism may struggle with communication or even may be nonverbal, they are still communicating, and that is important to recognize. When people are stimming or moving, that is still a form of communication. Admittedly, different communication to what you may be expecting, but still communication. This communication does have hidden messages. You can learn a lot about an individual from how they are expressing themselves physically. You don't have to wait verbally before you can read a person. Do you have to wait until someone is old enough to be diagnosed in order to support them? Absolutely not. You could just pick up on slight differences, maybe different glances. Are they responding to how you would imagine? The last one, which we will explore a bit more detail, is mixed signals, or what we call double-blindedness. This is when you have two different parents, maybe a mum, maybe a dad, maybe two dads, maybe two mums, and they both have very different approaches. Most people would say the mum would come from a much softer approach and the father from a much stricter approach, which when they come together could make the child more well-rounded. But when it comes to autism, we often struggle with conflicting messages, and this can make the brain struggle with the world around us. How can people be noisy and quiet? How can things make sense and not? When there's a collision, the brain gets really confused, and people's parenting styles normally exacerbate this. An example is one parent might say, if you do X, I'll punish you. The other one says, if you don't do X, I'll punish you. We've got two parents asking for the same thing. And because there's a disconnect, typically the secondary parent, which tends to be the father, will be seen as the bad guy. Then already one family connection is becoming stronger and the other one is becoming weaker. Not because there is anything wrong with the autistic individual, but because the communication between the two parents aren't aligned and it's creating mixed messages. Okay, so a lot of you are saying no, contradictory parent cannot cause autism. Do you know what? You're right. This was a theory that was believed for some time, either through the refrigerator mother theory, cold parenting, but it has been proven that it's not there. However, while having parents that might not be aligned can not cause autism, we know it's genetic, it can cause a lot of stress and anxiety in autistic individuals. So still useful to keep in mind, particularly if you might have parents who are separated or divorced or don't quite get on. On here, I just want you to slide left if you disagree or right if you agree. This is continuing with systematic therapy. Remember, systematic is when we consider everyone in the family dynamic. Sean says, this makes so much sense to me. My dad was strict, but my mum was soft as a child, and I was really anxious and didn't always feel safe at home. Thanks for sharing that. It does make a lot of sense. How are you meant to feel? I had a similar experience, to be fair. Autistic children are shaped by their environment. True or not true? Mostly, again, nature v nurture. Therapy strengthens relationships, not cures autism. Absolutely true. There's no cure for autism. Reality, because remember, it's part of who you are. However, how you are and how other people are, that can create conflict. So therapy can help soften that with better communication styles. Reality is shaped by social views seen differently in autism. Reality is what we know to be true. Just because it's true for you doesn't mean the same truth is same for someone else, particularly if you are someone who is known to see the world differently to the majority, such as someone with autism. Meanings can vary due to social norms. An example I often give is that not making eye contact could be considered rude in the UK, but not making eye contact in maybe like Japan could be seen as a sign of respect. Social norms, culture plays a big part in this as well. We often talk about what normal is, and yes, it does depend on culture, But tell me, in your culture, which I'm guessing most of us are from Western countries, what do you think normal actually means? Because if our child is developing abnormally or atypically, we may consider something wrong. But atypically is autism. There's lots of things which may seem odd or weird for someone who isn't autistic. But if you know someone has autism, suddenly a lot of these different qualities or characteristics, they become normal. Normal can mean neurotypical, so aligns with the majority. Being happy and content person in the world, that's a nice way of looking at normal. Able to see details that neurotypical does not. I don't think there is such a thing. I agree with you. There is no such thing as normal. There is such a thing as societal normal. That doesn't mean it's right, but that just means that it's like the adopted way of doing things. If you go against that grain naturally, you are always going to feel that you are in the wrong, you are different, you are less than, you are dumb, you are stupid. Those thoughts and feelings very early on can create severe amount of trauma. As a parent, it's so important to allow people to know that it's okay to be you, that we don't all fit the standard mold. It is a balance though, because you do want to teach people, like for instance, ABCs, very important, but someone may learn differently to how you are teaching. And if you keep trying to home in on an approach which isn't effective for them, it could have more negative repercussions than just not supporting at all. We've got hitting childhood milestones. Yes, for instance, at age 3, you should be walking or talking, where some people don't reach those milestones. So they stop being normal and become abnormal. And an abnormal goes into a diagnosis. Differences in how the brain processes information. Normality is individual and is influenced by the environment around us. Okay, all very good points. Now, to expand upon our understanding of normal, let's look at subjectivity. We're going to get a little bit contentious right now. What are your thoughts on the following? So I want you to select which ones you think are true. If all of us think the same and all of us are normal, we should all be on the exact same page. But what's the betting that we're not all going to align on some of this stuff? Sadness can become depression. A lot of you agree. It doesn't have to, though, does it? It depends. For some people, sadness will be a fleeting thing. For others, it will remain. Blue is for boys and pink is for girls. A lot of you agree with that. In some cultures, pink is for boys. Others, no color is something that we've applied to them. Girls that act like boys are tomboys, yet for some people, they're just girls. We are applying masculine characteristics to them, which can shape their development. And the last one, which is completely contentious, is the Bible is true. While a lot of you agree, some of you do not agree. You can see that even if you do not have autism, we do not agree on everything. But then having autism can make the subjectivity part really challenging. For instance, if one person in your life says, yes, religion is true, and the other person says, no, it is not, where are you meant to go from there? If someone gives you a pink t-shirt and you're a boy, you might feel bad about yourself because that isn't the color that you've been told is appropriate for you to wear. Subjectivity plays a big part in diagnosis. This is why some people get diagnosed with autism and some people do not, because we have applied certain parameters which are not biological markers. Is someone making eye contact? Yes or no? That's not to do with their biology. That is a behavior which maybe they learnt or they just doesn't have a preference for. We've got subjectivity can influence diagnosis through clinical basis, cultural factors, and parental perspectives. Essentially, there are a lot of factors which might determine whether or not you are considered normal, abnormal, autistic, not autistic, or many other things in between. Let's have a little look at the structural family theory. This is looking at how we all fit together, how every family member is absolutely crucial in the development of oneself. For instance, you've got your family dynamic, and regardless of whether or not you have autism, if your parents are of different age or your siblings are of different age, that can have an impact. Maybe your historical perspectives, your cultural, what is considered the norms. Maybe is your dad the breadwinner, the mum a stay at home, or do sometimes when there's a divorce. All these different dynamics can play a big part on how someone is able to cope. While we again know that autism is lifelong, it can change throughout your life. There'll be some times where coping is really easy, barely an inconvenience. And there'll be other times when it is so detrimental to your well-being and you can struggle. The difference between those spikes can often be a direct result of a dynamic in your day-to-day life shifting. Obviously, as family is so crucial to ourselves, that is normally the thing that kind of kickstart the turmoil, whether it's illness, death, divorce, broken heart, anything like that. An example of a kind of full circle, which shows us how every action feeds into another action, is, let's say Jane, someone called Jane, right? They feel upset. They're not feeling too happy. So what happens? Jane demands that Ben gets, fed. Then Ben lacks control, unable to regulate. Jane responds less sensitively. Ben becomes angry. Because Ben's angry, Jane becomes upset. Then Jane starts demanding an apology, then lacks control and unable to regulate. You can see how when we get in a situation of conflict, it's very difficult to break that cycle. This is why when we're aware of it, we might be able to take a step back, or at least according to structural family theory. I want you to rank your own self now. These are the type of questions that a therapist may ask you in order to dig under the surface. Do you think your family is supportive of your needs? Let's see, because I know a lot of you have autism. Let's go with that lens. Is your family supportive of your needs? Are rules flexible for neurodiverse behavior? When you might, for instance, be overstimulated, are people understanding towards that? Or do they just tell you to stiff up a lip? Also, do you connect more with one member of the family than another member? These areas are questions which you would see as quite integral. Is the family supportive of their needs? If it's not supportive, you'll feel like an outsider and you'll feel not normal, which will push you further to the fringes of society. Are rules flexible? Are there some things that you are not able to help, but people are still pushing you towards? That can again make you feel not as good and can affect your self-esteem and overall development. If there's one family member that you are more gravitated towards, it can cause a weak connection with other ones. Typically, the mum will have a stronger connection because they might spend more time at home with the children. Again, I'm obviously talking typically here because all families are different. Oh, we'll see here. We're not doing great. It shows a lot of us come with a lot of trauma, even if we aren't aware of that trauma. The key takeaways of family therapies is the focus on structure and boundaries. It's about clear communication, appreciating that all forms of movement, speech is a type of communication, but we all need to be on the same page about what that looks like. What's okay, what's not okay. Rather than one parent saying one thing and another saying another, everyone is aligned. We need to consider neurodiverse needs in decisions. We can't apply our own understanding and logic to someone who we know to think significantly different, or we're always going to come to loose ends. The family is seen as a system with subsystems. For instance, you have your matriarch, your mum and dad, then you have brothers and sisters, you have the good cop, bad cop. Everyone has a role. If we think of it like an ecosystem where everything is crucial, that would be beneficial. Again, highlights hierarchy impacts on the autistic person. We all need to feel equal. If you are being talked down to or seen as a lesser person because of your difference, that could also cause challenges later down the line. There are a lot of things to consider and to break down here. Ian, I'm curious to know if you think this makes sense to you, or if you think, you know what, they're barking up the wrong tree. There are no right or wrong opinions here. This is just different schools of thoughts that some people think work, some people think do not work, others think are suitable for those with autism, and others think they are not suitable. Now I want you to select another theory that you think you'd be interested in learning more about. This is just for my own benefit, to be honest. Things that we might want to dive in deep for another day. Next week, we're going to be looking at some of these. So it's just to get an idea about which ones you think, I have no idea what that is, but sounds interesting. Behavioral family therapy is a very classic one. Contextual therapy, structural family, well, we talked a bit about that today. There are lots of different ways which people consider the correct way. I think because we realize how many there are, it tells you that there really isn't a correct way. You do have to lead by your own gut instinct. Basically, you all want to learn everything. Great. All right, I'll try my best to include them in future ones. Now, we've got a little bit more before we can round up for today. We've talked about family therapies. And next week, we're going to take more of a deeper dive on individuals or what you can personally do to create mental stability. But I'll hold off for that until next week because there's just so much to cover. If you thought this was interesting, I would love to know where you got your information from or dive in a bit deeper. Here are some of our sources. Do check them out. There's lots of information around online. If you are in the UK, there is support available if you do have autism. We can't go back in time and correct the sins of the past, but we are able to create support strategies going forward. While certain types of therapy aren't eligible for this grant, you can get coaching and mentoring. I highly encourage mentoring and coaching if you are able to have access to it. But the big kind of warning, or I would state, is make sure that the people delivering that coaching or training have had experience with autistic individuals. Otherwise, sometimes it can do more harm than good. But we're going to briefly look at cognitive behavioral therapy as well as other forms of therapy next week and how they have been adapted to work with those with autism. If you did want to catch up on previous webinars we've done, go check out our YouTube channel. We have lots of great content. We have done other sessions on different therapies and strategies before, which you may find useful and beneficial. There we are. Contact us if you want to find out more about support available. Go to our website. Drop me an email personally if you want to get in contact. Add me on LinkedIn if you so please. I hope you found it useful and insightful. And if you do have any recommendations for future webinars, I'm currently in the process of planning next year's roster. Thanks, everyone. Really lovely. And I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday and hopefully see you in the following week.